Welcome to the Longevity Week podcast, hosted by the Longevity Forum. We'll be featuring podcasts all week on the theme Sustainability in a Decade of Healthy Aging, which you can listen to online at thelongevityforum.com. This episode is a special podcast session featuring a conversation between Declan Doogan, Chief Medical Officer of Juvenescence, and world-renowned scientist and centenarian James Lovelock. James Lovelock is an environmentalist and futurist. He is best well known for proposing the Gaia hypothesis and has authored several books. From inventing the microwave to consulting for NASA's space projects, James has been a pioneer of our age, and we are proud to award him the Longevity Forum Person of the Year Award for 2021.
What is your avocation, or is it just, quotes, thinking?
Well, I always emulated, or tried to emulate, our scientist Faraday way back when.
Yeah.
Now, as you well know, he had virtually zero education. And I didn't do very well at school or university, come to that. And because I couldn't be bothered with it, mostly.
Right.
I wanted to get on and invent things and apply them to practical problems. And I didn't care what the problem was. My first employer was the British Medical Research Council. They kept me for 20 years, and I resigned at the end of it when I got this letter from Abe Silverstein.
Right, fascinating. And then you talk about linear thinking versus systems thinking, which is, it's so appropriate for biology and cellular physiology and biology. Did that come to you later, or were you educated in linear thinking, cause and effect?
I never thought of it in such specific terms. It was much more, well, I'll tell you how it all happened. I was at the time, the problem I'd been given was to find out what was the nature of damage caused by freezing. And we, together with a biologist, a lady called Audrey Smith, she was a really talented person. We managed to freeze a golden hamster solid, so that it was like a block of ice if you dropped it on the bench.
And I remember you saying that, what was it, biologists are cruel.
That's right. And you could bring it back to life. Not only bring it back to life, but it hadn't lost its memory.
Yeah.
And but that was the only animal you could do it with. There wasn't anything else.
Fascinating. Only animal? You couldn't do it with a rabbit or...
That's right. Galagi, we tried, rabbits, rats, all sorts. And then I worked out the maths of it and published it in a paper in the New York Academy of Sciences. I didn't care what the problem was scientifically, as long as it was interesting and it was a challenge. And that's what inventors do. I'm sure
exactly.
Faraday or Edison would have told you that sort of thing.
I'm just interested in one thing that I'm looking at here, 1948. Handkerchiefs in the transfer of respiratory infection.
Yes, well, my first...
Yes, indeed.
Well,
Who doesn't
my
know
first job was to go working in the tubes shelters in London, because that was during the Blitz, and because they were afraid that in the very crowded conditions of the tube shelters, there was a real danger of a major epidemic starting and spreading. And we had all sorts of microbiological sampling instruments down there, and I spent time doing that.
And did you conclude that, as today, that masking or the equivalent thereof might help? Because around about that time there was lots of infection, there was tuberculosis and
That's
other
right.
bacterial infections.
Absolutely. And we were able to stop a hefty epidemic of hemolytic streptococci in a hospital ward for all coming from a single carrier who had the organisms in his nose, and he was a nasal carrier. The room was absolutely saturated with hemolytic streptococci, and me and my colleague were breathing them, but we must have been resistant.
Yes, of course. But anyway, it's an interesting thought that you were dealing with this, and
Well, that's how
something
I
akin.
started in that particular field, and stayed with it, and then moved to the Common Cold Research Laboratory, which Harvard University kindly, there was a hospital built for US servicemen during World War II near the town of Salisbury in Britain. And at the end of the war, Harvard University kindly donated it on one condition only, that it was used as a research establishment.
Right.
For infectious diseases. And the Brits, with great cunning, thought, well, why not the common cold? It loses a lot of hours of work and whatnot. And so the Common Cold Research Unit was started up, and I was sent there.
Did you think at the time when you were at the Common Cold Research Laboratory that there would be an invention that would cure the common cold?
Not really, no.
Because?
I thought that curing the common cold would almost certainly be a skilled application of virology, of knowing what vaccine or something to make. That wasn't my thing, but I wanted to know how it spread,
Right.
and what one could do about that, and hence that paper
Right.
on handkerchiefs, because that it always seemed we travelled in tube trains, watching the habits of people to see which was the more likely way of spreading the disease. And you watch them with their handkerchiefs, and I just shook my head, and it was just asking for trouble. And we measured how many bugs were put in the air or bacteria carrying particles were put in the air by shaking handkerchiefs, and it was formidable.
I'm sure.
But the maximum transfer occurred from the straps that the people caught hold of, because the fingers would be covered with secretion. They'd go up, hold it, and transfer it, and roughly speaking, you got milligrams at most transferred by rapid
aerosol droplet, yeah.
But up to hundreds or tens of milligrams transferred as direct secretion. And we then did an experiment with volunteers. We got volunteers across one side of a room and a big blanket in between, so that any airborne staff would go across, and we put children children on the reception side and volunteers who had colds on the other side, and then saw how much transfer occurred. And airborne, there was virtually never got any. Direct droplet transfer, a few, but contact, we got the kids playing cards with the, it was 100% nearly. And that's in the Lancet somewhere. It'll be in that list.
Yes, I'm going to pull that out.
Thank you.
Thank you. So can I just fast forward to today's world in terms of your views on how we live from a medical perspective? I know that we're talking about increased life expectancy, and you're a wonderful exemplar of that.
Well, I'm not, as far as medicine goes. Nearly every illness I've had has been iatrogenic.
Oops.
I was very healthy up until about 50. I think I'm bad at dates, but it doesn't matter anyway. Up until about 50, when I got an angina at a Gordon conference in America, I think it was, and saw the necessary physicians and things. And in no time, I was finding myself in a hospital ward in London, King's College Hospital, due to be have open heart surgery, because that was before the days of stents.
Stenting, yeah.
And I duly had it, and it was fine. The surgeon was first class, did a first class job, and it's still, I've had nothing further done. No stents, no nothing. So it was a really good job he did. You may be interested. If you go independent as a scientist, you have to have at least 5 customers. Well, I mean, some customer, when you've answered a question like that detector, will turn around and say, "Oh, thank you very much, we paid you now, goodbye." And so you've got to have about 5 going all the time, and then the attrition with time looks after it. And one of my customers was MI6. And here is a letter of thanks I got from the James Bond's boss. He's now called C, not M.
Vauxhall Cross, London. Congratulations on your 100th birthday. We are greatly in your debt for the work you have done and the way in which it still supports our operations. The fact that this work is of seminal importance in understanding climate change means that I can thank you as well as a citizen and occupant of this planet. You will find a couple of small gifts with this note as tokens of our gratitude and admiration, wishing your future good health and intellectual creativity. C. And that's the person who ran
There are not too many people get those.
And with an envelope that says top
Well,
secret.
that it didn't come in that. If it had come in that, I couldn't have shown you.
I would
Other
have,
things did.
or I would have had to sign the Official Secrets Act before I walked in the door. That's amazing.
Do you know, I've calculated, I've brought in funds into my country 10 times more than I'm taken from it to do my science.
Interesting.
The few university people could make such a thing.
Wonderful. That's also an achievement. If only you could have had a small percentage of that for yourself.
Yes. Well, obviously.
Thank you very much. Tell me, did you ever meet Einstein?
No, I didn't. Let me see. No, I didn't. None of the ones I met were Blackett. He was my physics professor at Manchester University, and several other. In fact, the National Institute where I first worked was, well, I wouldn't say disgraced, but mine was the only laboratory along the 3rd floor that didn't get a Nobel Prize.
Wow.
It's not often known that electron capture detector that you saw there. Yes.
So we could just have a look at it.
Spring's come off.
You've broken it.
No.
Oh, no.
That was used by the EPA, or a copy of it was used by the EPA in approving Rachel Carson's allegations about the pesticides correct. Before it existed, it was quite impossible to measure small amounts of DDT and dieldrin and other compounds.
And that gadget, if I can call it such a poor word, that would actually detect the amount of DDT in the atmosphere?
It's a strange thing. It detects far more easily poisonous things than harmless ones. And its sensitivity is extreme. It detects much less than parts per trillion.
Extraordinary.
And
Extraordinary. Not being a chemist or a
it
physicist.
all started because Archer Martin, the inventor of gas chromatography, said to me, "I wish someone would invent a more sensitive detector for me." And in 2 weeks I've come back with 2 of them. one that looked like this, that was called the argon detector, and set gas chromatography up. The manufacturers made instruments incorporating it all over the world. And this one, which was by far the most sensitive.
A couple of questions of interest to me is, when are people at their most creative and innovative?
When they're born, I suppose. I think you're born that way. Whether it's interesting or not, two of the surgeons at the hospital here got interested in how I seemed to be surviving the attentions of their...
Despite them?
And took my DNA and sent it for analysis. And they came back with a very extraordinary answer. They said that my DNA showed a descent not from Eve, as on the mitochondrial line,
Yes.
as most of us are, but from Ursula, a female that lived some 20,000 years earlier than that.
So you're an old soul.
Hmm?
You're an old soul.
Her name was Ursula.
Ursula,
Yeah, like after the bear, presumably. And I don't know whether that's of any significance or not, but that's what they told me.
We should probably do a study looking at that factor and how it predicts for not only longevity but also creativity, and look at the other great inventors of the time
Yes.
to see if that is indeed a predictor of...
Of capacity for invention. I wouldn't know. All I know, people don't understand invention. You never sort of get your ideas together in your mind and produce an invention. It doesn't work like that. It depends on someone saying, I wish someone would invent something like this. And suddenly your mind goes to work.
But you talk in the book about intuition being a very important
it would
piece.
be, yes. It's a form of intuition. But it doesn't come by putting thoughts together or from one's history. It comes suddenly out of the blue, as if someone were telling you. I mean, the proof of that is that, and one other just as useful device was produced in 2 weeks on response to Archer Martin's comment, I wish someone would invent.
So what does your normal day look like, apart from walking on the beach road here?
What is...
Your normal day, are you...
The normal day is not getting up very early, because Sandy likes to sleep in.
Because I work hard.
I get up about 7:30 to 8.
That would be
get my own
for a lot of
breakfast.
retired people.
Then Sandy gets up and appears a bit
About
later.
7 o'clock for tea is really the right time.
And by which time we're ready to go for a walk, and we usually go for a walk together along the road. And sometimes Sandy's younger than me, so she climbs the hill as well.
My goodness.
Well, it's medicine, isn't it? Or it's prevention.
Absolutely right.
And not overeating. Those are the two things. I think you've got to use your mind. You've got to use your mind, your muscle, and
there is a most
and not be
amazing
greedy.
assortment of botanical things along here, wildflowers that are rare elsewhere in the nation. And it's wonderful to see them coming out in their turn one by one. Things like various forms of orchid and various things like the Mechanopsis, the Welsh poppy.
Yes.
A whole range of them to see.
Magic.
And of course the sea.
One serious question is, what role does optimism play in your longevity?
A big one, I think, because it was quite strange. When I reached 100, I thought, that's the end. There's nothing more to really look forward to. And quite suddenly, a few days later, I felt a great contentment. I thought, oh, it's not so bad after all. And it's been like that ever
Life after
since.
100. Fantastic. I do think, just in general, that the people I know of in significantly advanced years, many of them do display that characteristic of real optimism and the ability to withstand difficulties.
This broadcast has been brought to you by the Longevity Forum as part of Longevity Week 2021. We are very grateful to our sponsors, Juvenescence and Burnbrae. For more podcasts, visit our website, thelongevityforum.com, or follow us on Twitter, longevity_forum.